Life is made up of experiences. Experiences shape our perspectives and allow us to pass along knowledge. In this podcast, I sit down with listeners like you and find out that no matter who you are, everyone has a story to tell. I'm Ethan Smith, and this is Life Experienced.
Well, I would be thrilled to finally know the answer to the question of, am I going to be an inventor or an actor? Because those were the two career paths I always saw myself going down. Granted, I don't think inventor is an actual job title you can have, but I think that getting my PhD in engineering would make 10-year-old Mick very excited. So.
Our guest today is Mick Williams, a colleague of mine who hopes to fulfill his childhood dream of becoming an inventor during his graduate studies in chemical engineering. But alongside his professional pursuits of science, Mick's aspiration of becoming an actor has manifested itself in many interesting ways. I sat down with Mick to talk about his history with the performing arts. Okay, so you mentioned acting. So tell us a little bit about your history with performing arts.
Absolutely. So I have started doing theater since the earliest age they let kids run around on stage in community theater. I think something like 6. I was a rat in a production of the Pied Piper of Hamelin. So I had one speaking line, which was some sort of yell or shriek. And it's nothing but up from there. It did count. I had a line in the script. I had something to highlight. As the years went on, I used more and more highlighter. If you've ever heard of A Christmas Story, like Ralphie Parker, BB Gun, so that was my breakout role in community theater. Is I got to be Ralphie Parker, and I ended up having to memorize about half a book at age 11. That was a lot of fun. But the theater goes on for a while, but with the stage plays, those petered out about halfway through high school, actually. I did a lot of stage productions all the way through high school, and they kept taking up more and more time, and so did high school. And at some point, I had to slow back on them because, grades still mattered to me. Spending time in school still mattered. And to fill the void, that's when I started doing more improv theater and street performances and things like that.
As he approached the end of high school, Mick decided to apply to engineering school instead of pursue an acting career. He did not, however, let this stop him from continuing his passion for the performing arts. This would eventually lead him to pick up a hobby with a new flair for the dramatic. Did you do anything as an undergraduate student to kind of stay involved with those types of things?
Absolutely. So this is the big thing that a lot of people know about me when you do those little group circle introductions. They're like, tell us something about yourself. I was paid to be a pirate for many years, for about 6 years. We dressed up in, I'd like to say, fairly authentic period wear, duck cotton and, proper leather shoes and all that. And we fought with full contact stage combat. So not real fighting, but fighting made to look much cooler than real fighting, with full metal weapons, the kind that you can bang together and they don't fall apart. Rapiers, epee, saber, that style of swordsmanship. But the big flashy princess bride, swing it around your head and slam them together. There was some element of comedy and improv in the act. And when I was in high school, it actually paid pretty well. We'd get, I would personally get like $200 to $300 for a Saturday, or maybe like half a Saturday, half a Sunday of work. We'd go to street festivals, largely on the coast, but sometimes we'd do something in Raleigh or in Cary, just little town festivals. And again, when you're 16, dressing up like a pirate and getting paid a couple $100 in cash was pretty nice. So from that, I kept doing it into college because I was already doing it, and things have inertia. And if you want to do theater in college and also get any kind of engineering degree, people do it, just like how people can be on varsity football teams and get engineering degrees. But they require less sleep and have more, say, like focus and dedication than I might have had. And I did end up doing an engineering degree. So, and not to go too at length about this, but the further you get in your engineering degree, the less time you do have on weekends in the evenings to drive to Wilmington, North Carolina. And the money stops looking as good, too, when you're thinking about giving up 2 or 3 days. You start wondering, well, is it really worth the time and the gas money?
Not to mention, you've also been in a committed relationship for a long time.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. If we're telling my life story, my wife, then girlfriend, Elizabeth, I have been dating her since before my freshman year of high school. So we have been together for 10 years, 9 months, some odd days at this point. And yeah, so she went to school right down the road at Meredith College. It's a women's college that is, a 10-minute walk from NC State. And yeah, if you want to keep up a relationship and have a social life and be in engineering and do theater, that's when I start to feel like even people who are better than me at time management would start to feel stretched a little thin.
So you effectively lose time to be a pirate, unfortunately.
Absolutely. And if something's got to give and you're choosing between your degree and your future wife and some semblance of friends in a social life, piracy eventually has to be the thing that goes. And it was pretty hard because, they're your coworkers, but with a job like that, they're your friends. Most of the rest of the group were people in their 40s and 50s. They had been doing it for 20 years at that point. We had a couple other people a little closer to my age, but they were still my friends. I had gotten to know them over the years, come from very different backgrounds, but they were good people, still are good people. Troop is still alive and well. But that was a part of my life that I had to find a way for it to take less time away from everything else.
Mick is now starting his 4th year in graduate school. Given that performing and acting have been such a large part of his life, it should be no surprise that he has found a way to continue his performances. Except now they take place in a different venue. Well, I know that there's one thing that you still do that kind of keeps the performing arts alive, and I feel like first, before we talk about it, we should just kind of rid the air of misconceptions, because I know there's a lot of people that think when people get together to play Dungeons and Dragons, they're playing with Ouija boards, they're calling up spirits, they're having seances, there's all sorts of paranormal things going on. But if you had to describe Dungeons and Dragons to someone who had no idea, who's never experienced it, never played, how would you do that?
Well, it's just a bunch of nerds around a table doing their best to tell crazy stories together. My swords, sadly, stay put away when we play D&D. I don't get to break out my wizard hat and robes. No, I've been actually playing D&D since high school. I learned from a group there, but it didn't become a bigger part of my life until college when I started. I had that creative urge, that creative need, and not really a good way to scratch it. And I had all these friends, and they had all these expectations of me interacting with them in some way, which is just awful. And it allowed me to kill 2 birds with 1 stone. So what D&D is, for those not in the know, it is the oldest tabletop role-playing game. And it is a collaborative game. You're not trying to beat your friends. You're trying to work together to accomplish tasks or goals. Those tasks and goals are managed by one person who's called the game master or the dungeon master, or the DM is usually the term you'll hear. So the DM runs the world. They run the bad guys and the helpful non-player characters. They'll tend to come up with the plots, or they can run things out of a pre-written module. But the game is all about improvisation, about players being creative and the DM being creative back. they're it's like when you play make believe as a kid, except when you play make believe, there's this problem of one person is like, oh well, I shoot my laser at you, and the other person is like, oh well, I block it. In D&D, there's some rules, so you say, well, I shoot my laser and I got a 16, and then the other person is like, oh well, you needed a 17 to hit me, so. But it has allowed me to keep being creative, to come up with stories, to work within a framework with friends, to be a little performative too, to come up with interesting and exotic locales, plot lines, bad guys and good guys, and to kind of get a little of that performing vibe, but in a way that only takes 4 hours every Sunday instead of taking an entire weekend once a month. It's a little less intrusive in your life.
So how much time would you say goes into planning for these things?
Absolutely. So I have tended to be the DM for most of my groups. It's frankly can be a lot of work if you let it be. I'm not one of those great DMs who makes the giant table-wide foam sculptures that are painted and brushed, because I know that if I did that, my players would decide to go somewhere else or do something else. But I'll tend to spend for a 4-hour session on a Sunday, I'll tend to spend 6 to 8 hours in the days leading up to it getting things ready. Plus, time when you're driving to work, mulling things over, lots of shower thoughts get incorporated into games. That's where most of my good ideas come from. But it can be a bit of a time commitment, but you can spread it out. And if you need to skip a week, there's no actual audience, right? It's just your friends. You're just hanging out with them. You can say, guys, everything isn't ready. Let's just play Pandemic or Settlers of Catan instead.
Dungeons and Dragons can be as laid back or as involved as you want it to be. I asked Mick about what kinds of resources he uses to develop the plots and situations featured in his campaigns. Do you come up with a lot of the situations yourself, or do you use guides or suggestions, things like that?
So back in the day, in high school, and when I ran a few games in college, I tended to use, they're called modules. They're ready-made campaigns that brighter minds than my own have put together. And those are great when you're very strapped for time, because they tend to have a lot of the answers already there. Your players will often want to know really weird things, like it'll be very important to them to find out the name of the random bartender behind the bar. And a lot of modules will have stuff like that ready for you, so you don't have to be quite as creative on the spot. Another trial when you're running a D&D game is keeping things the right level of difficulty. Again, it's not the players against each other, it's the players against the world. But it's no fun if they beat everything with no challenge, and it's certainly no fun if they have to make new characters every week because you keep killing them. I would definitely get in trouble with my wife if that was the case. She gets very attached. So keeping things the right level of power it's more of an art than a science. Sometimes you have to play it by ear a little bit if they were very clever and they're steamrolling an encounter. Maybe you add a few hit points to the monster. Maybe it takes a few more swings to go down than the book necessarily says. But I have transitioned, as I'm implying, to playing things a little more by ear, coming up with stories and ideas myself. And of course you draw from things. You draw from plot lines from books you've read or ideas you've heard about over the years, and you make them your own. But the freedom and the free expression that you get when you come up with your own storylines, that's something I really value these days.
That's great. So is there a way that you could give us kind of an example plot line or example storyline, the way that you start these things off?
Absolutely. So I'm very proud of my little game group, because we went from level 1 to level 20 over the course of 2.5 years. And there were lots of little side quests along the way. But the main overarching plot line that kept coming back was that there was a magic college. set in the town of Arcanix, where wizards and sorcerers go to learn their magic. And that was the original hook. They were all level 1. All of their characters had some interest in magic. And so they were, little freshman wizards and druids and stuff at this school. And unbeknownst to them, buried deep beneath Arcanix, was a bound, powerful demon lord. And this bound demon lord had followers in the world above, and those followers had to achieve a series of objectives to unlock the bindings. Now, the rule of 3 being what they are, if those attempts to unseal the demon lord were defeated 3 times, the requirements to free her would change, and the bad guys would be sent into disarray until they could figure out what they needed to do again. So at key points in the story, the players would catch wind of or be thrust into situations where they would have to foil the attempts of this demon lord's underlings, with successively more powerful underlings being the people running the show. So that's an idea of sort of a big, grand, multi-year campaign arc. That's the kind of story they get to tell. And of course, that's the super broad, stretched out idea. And it's the minutia that the players tend to have a ton of control over, the way individual things go. I mean, the bad guys are allowed to win. The good guys can lose an encounter, need to retreat, and the bad guy can be one step closer to ending the world. And that just, as a adaptable DM, you just take that and run with it. Maybe things get a little darker. Maybe there's more monsters around. As the players go through the game, their characters become capable of more, so you can ramp up the difficulty of the things they're doing.
In a technological age where more and more communications take place via smartphones and computers, getting together for some quality time with friends is always a refreshing experience. I asked Mick how his weekly D&D games have impacted his life during graduate school. Certainly, it sounds like you enjoy this, spend a lot of time with it. So, what would you say that including that in part of your life during graduate school, how has that impacted your life?
So it's been really important for me because it's given me an excuse to hang out with people other than Elizabeth, who I love, but you should do stuff with more than just one person in your life. It's having a regular weekly to bi-weekly thing like that has given me a good reason to hang out with some of my friends. It's given me a creative pursuit. It's given me, I can write without having to feel like I need to write a novel. I can come up with creative ideas without feeling like they're a waste of time, because it's not a waste of time. I'm going to use them to hang out with my friends. And it's given me a chance to feel performative, to feel expressive, to improvise without the time commitment that comes with actually joining like a theater troupe. It's certainly an easier, more straightforward way to pursue that particular side of myself.
Clearly, there can be many great things about getting together to enjoy time spent with others. If Mick's description of the game has you excited about starting your own, here's the advice Mick offered for beginning your own campaign. So what advice would you give someone who has never played it but is considering getting involved?
So doing any kind of tabletop RPG with friends is great because you can't do it wrong. It's absolutely impossible. The only way you do it wrong is if you don't have fun. So you can pick up. We play the third edition of D&D 3.5, which is a little older and a little more complex. It's got more options, more knobs to turn. They have a 5th edition out now, which is a lot smoother, easier to pick up, easier to learn. So if I'm to shill for Wizards of the Coast for a little bit, I do think D&D is an incredible game. It's 1,000 games in one because it's, you're only limited by your own creativity. You don't have to have played before to run a game yourself. I do recommend you read the rule books, but not everybody reads them all the way through before they play. I still occasionally have to remind my now veteran players of 2.5 years about rules because, there's a lot of them. But as long as you're having fun, it doesn't really matter if you remember the minutia. It's really just about the stories you tell.
Mick will no doubt carry his performance skills with him for the rest of his life, and always find a way to use them no matter where he is. This reminds us that wherever you are, you can almost always find the time to pursue your passions. I'm sure Mick would encourage you to get out there and find yours. Life Experienced is hosted and produced by Ethan D. Smith and is primarily distributed via D Sound, a decentralized audio sharing platform built on the Steam blockchain. For more information, visit dsound.audio. The music in this podcast is composed by Lee Rosevere and used under Creative Commons Attribution 4.0 license. For more information, visit freemusicarchive.org. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. If you like the podcast, be sure to share it with others. If you have an interesting experience that you want to share, please let me know by tweeting at Ethan D. Smith or visiting ethandsmith.com. And finally, for those of you still listening, I asked Mick if he could recall a memorable moment from his recent D&D campaign. I hope you'll enjoy. So, can you think of anything over the time that you've been playing this particular game? Anything that's like super interesting, super fun, something particular that you can remember that you've especially enjoyed about this campaign?
So, it absolutely kills me, but the funniest things that happen are the things that I have absolutely no hand in. At one point, my players had just successfully stolen an artifact of incredible power from a city held by occupying forces. And, of course, the only thing they take away from it is, on their way out of the city, I decide to give them just a small little combat encounter to keep them on their toes. And they have to fight this pair of goblins. And they do not fight the goblins. They rough them up a little, tie them up, and then decide that they're going to take them under their wing. I couldn't figure out why. I had given the goblins some small backstory, like they were pretending to sell haunches of rat, and they were really just luring the players into an ambush. And the players give the goblins money, and they ask them to set up a stand in town. They want them to franchise. It makes no sense to me, but I went with it. And they, over the course of the next year or so, frequently ask, how are they doing? How's the business going? At one point, they use powerful magic to teleport to these goblins to check in on them, make sure the rat franchise is going well. It's honestly the little silly moments that not just the characters, but the players, my friends, still joke about, still talk about. It wasn't a hard encounter. It wasn't important. It contributed to no plot. But they still laugh about Bork and Mork, these two entrepreneurial goblins. So there's a good slice of D&D life for you there.
Well, it's good to know that capitalism is alive and well in the world of
very
Dungeons
much
and Dragons.
So. I decided that they were successful.
That's good.
They also switched to Rabbit, much more.
Okay.
Fares better with people than Rat, I think.
Sure.